So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to come together today or tonight or this morning, whatever time it is for you in your time zone. Our speakers are all spread out across time zones. Some are just having a very early breakfast, some preparing for bedtime. So I'm sure around the world we have all the time zones covered here. I'm Jo Pradella. I'm the Director of Knowledge Translation and Equality Insights at the International Women's Development Agency, IWDA. We've opted not to have a moderator for this event, so each speaker is going to introduce themselves when they first speak and will co-facilitate the discussion as a group. Before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining this discussion, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. If it's appropriate in your context to identify the traditional owners of the lands where you're joining from, please do so and pop that in the chat. That would be lovely. So here we are in the last few days before the Paris Generation Equality Forum starts next week. And as many of you know, the forum was conceptualized more than 2 years ago as a way to mark the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing and to accelerate the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And then COVID hit and it set things back. So more women than ever are experiencing and reporting domestic violence around the world. Women have lost work and income, and they're in more precarious work situations or lower paid work. And women's care labor is more visible than ever, but it's also higher than ever. So that's where we are 26 years after Beijing, and the task ahead of us now is greater than it was before. Our 4 organizations have been engaged in the generation equality process in various ways. And so we're really pleased to bring this panel together to galvanize the energy of change makers and advocates for gender data, like all of you here today. And it's been an opportunity for us to work together to champion gender data as the critical and foundational investment for achieving gender equality. We know that the forum's aims will be strengthened if there's the right data to guide action, and the commitments that are going to be unveiled on the 30th of June will be more meaningful and more accountable if data is at the center. So as part of planning for this event, we put a call out to gender and data advocates around the world to share their data demands so that we could amplify these voices and to reflect the feminist spirit of the generation equality process, which is to work across stakeholder groups, across power and across hierarchy, and to co-create. So we're really excited to start the session by launching our gender data demands, a video which is bringing the voices of feminists from around the world in their own words, calling for a data lift for gender equality. Following the video, I'll just say a few brief words about how the session will run, and then we'll jump in. So Cleantha is going to share the video now.
important for gender mainstreaming.
La incidencia con datos es clave para la atención de la violencia contra las mujeres en nuestro país. Hoy acudimos a la incidencia desde los datos.
My gender data demand is to count women and girls in.
We are the future, count us now.
The lives of women do count. Make us visible in gender data.
Fabulous. So we'll be sharing the video on Twitter and other social media channels after this session, and we would warmly welcome your support in getting it out far and wide ahead of the Generation Equality Forum in the coming days. So we've organized tonight's discussion around the 4 core demands on gender data that the video showed. So this concept of a data lift, so to leverage existing gender data for change, to increase the amount and quality of available gender data, to fuel political will and investment to fund and use gender data to drive equality, and to transform the understanding of adequate data and establish gender-sensitive data as the norm. So panelists will address each of those focus areas for about 3 minutes each, covering why that area matters, what their organization is doing to accelerate change, and what they're asking of others, particularly through the Generation Equality Forum process. We encourage everyone to ask questions using the chat feature. We'll come to a Q&A at the end once we've gone through each of the 4 areas. And we're also asking if you have gender data demands to please put them in the chat thread, and we'll combine them with others that we've received from the video and share the list with the Generation Equality Action Coalitions and via social media across the coming days. So over to you, Emily, to introduce leverage.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's great to be with everyone. For those here I haven't met, my name is Emily Corey-Pryor. I'm Executive Director of Data2X. I'm honored to be so. I'm also really pleased to be here. And I just have to say, I love a good acronym. And so if we were all in person, you know, I'd be asking everyone to get up out of their seats and do a collective lift for gender equality. But as it is, I'm really glad to kick off the discussion. And the first letter in the acronym, L, to leverage existing gender data for change. So just for those who aren't familiar with Data2X, just small background on us and why we see next week's Generation Equality Forum as such a key opportunity. So we have been operating since 2013. We're a technical and advocacy platform working through partnerships to both build the case and mobilize action for gender data, but also to pursue direct interventions to strengthen both the production and the use of gender data. And really, since our start, we've been working to identify the gaps in available gender data, as well as to devise solutions to close them. But as this theme and as this video so beautifully, I think, illustrates, data does nothing if it's sitting on the shelf or in the cloud. It absolutely must be used in government policies, in programming that all of us, many of our colleagues around the world are delivering, and also importantly in the design of global action plans like the one that will be finalized during the Generation Equality Forum. If we're ever to understand inequalities and really make a practical difference in the lives of women and girls and communities. Data2X is very committed to this work because, as Joe has already outlined, this gender data has the immense potential to really accelerate gender equality. I just want to give an example of one way, especially in terms of leveraging existing data, this can work. So there's a really interesting example from Uruguay, and I don't know if there's anyone from Uruguay who's in the audience today. But the short story is that a regional university collected time use data to quantify women's unpaid work and found that an overwhelming majority of the region's women were spending more than 2/3 of their time on unpaid care. Advocates then used this data to push for the implementation of national time use surveys, which then became really key inputs into the development of Uruguay's national care system, which launched, I believe, at the end of 2015 or 2016. So this is a great example of the ways in which existing data, leveraged by researchers, by policy advocates, as well as by the government, was used to drive further research and further data collection that then led to policy, which had a real impact on people's lives. I won't say much about this now, we can talk about it in the chat, but just wanted to mention, I think in terms of leveraging existing data, big data and digital data is another area. It certainly has its pluses and minuses. However, that is an area of existing data where there could be some great potential for having more real-time information and nuance to the complexities of the lives of all people. We've actually undertaken quite a big program of research on this to really understand the intricacies of digital data and both the promises and the pitfalls of this, but there is some compelling evidence, and I think it's something important for us all as a community to think about how this can be helpful, as well as to sound, the alarm bells when it's not helpful as well. Data2X, as we turn and think about Generation Equality Forum and what's coming up over the next week, we're really focusing on, driving action by uncovering some of these examples of positive change that we see and exploring the potential of new data sources to demonstrate that gender data is a really essential part of the solution for gender equality, and to mobilize momentum for gender data, not only at the Generation Equality Forum, but importantly beyond, right? We're not all in this for one moment in June, July, we're in this for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, however long it takes to get us to where we need to go. So that's why we're asking for commitment makers across all sectors to make bold commitments to gender data, from collecting and disaggregating data, to financing gender data gaps, to using existing data to inform their decision-making. No matter what sector people are from, they can all make a commitment to gender data. So to ensure the promises made at the Paris Forum are kept, and of course, to test whether or not our collective demands for gender data are being met, our commitment as Data2X is going to be to track all gender data commitments that are made at the Generation Equality Forum to ensure that the data we need to monitor our progress and meet our goals are actually delivered. So I will stop there for now. You'll hear more from me later. I'm really pleased to pass the virtual mic to my friend Frida Gatuku. Over to you, Frida. Oh, we can't hear you, Frida. Oh, not yet. Oh no.
Can you hear?
Yes.
I have to do away with this. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Emily. My name is Frida Gezuku. I'm the Executive Director of GROOT Kenya, and GROOT is a national movement of grassroots women. This is a critical moment for us because GROOT was born out of Beijing, so we are celebrating our 26th Yes, and as we evaluate the progress we've made, even as an organization, we are evaluating ourselves, the changes we've made in the life of grassroots women and girls. Our mandate or our the reason why we are founded is to facilitate effective engagement of grassroots women in development, and we do this through movement building, leadership development, and community-led evidence-driven advocacy. That is why data is very critical. The constituency that we are powering, the movement that we are powering, and resources lives, and most of us as advocates, we are in a society that is full of distorted truths. Gender equality space also has a lot of bias. A lot of decisions are based on attitudes. And for us, we find that the use of data and evidence helps us to navigate through that complex space. And how are we doing this, and why do we do it? First of all, the reason why we like and we enjoy leveraging on existing data is the fact that it empowers grassroots women and put them at the same level with policymakers as stakeholders. All along, we've been negotiating for them to be in the decision-making spaces. We've made progress in that area, but we want them to arrive there when they are fully equipped, when they have the evidence, and when they have all the information that is required to influence policy, so that they can engage with these policymakers at equal level. So that's why it is critical for us. And we do this by putting data in the hands of women, and we put it in the manner that in a manner that they understand, a manner that is simple. So our responsibility as an organization, of course, is to find this data, because you have to invest in finding it, synthesizing this data, simplifying it, visualizing it, working with these women to make sure that they use data, and we co-create what is the advocacy message that they want to put out there. What is it that they want to pursue with this data? Out of this, as an organization, we've been able to create a gender data dashboard for Kenya, a very simplified dashboard that these advocates are able to access even on their phone. And of course, it's capturing sectors that are critical for rural women and women living in the informal settlement. And it's a process through which we've engaged the women to agree which sector do you want us to reflect, what indicators do you want us to visualize, what is more relevant in the context that you live in. Meaning they are fully equipped, both in terms of skill, but in terms of where they can source those data sets when they want to engage in policy advocacy. And this data has really supported them in their advocacy work to generate interest at subnational level for development of policy. We have had in 2 counties, we call them counties here, subnational, where we've generated interest within government to generate or to formulate a policy on climate change. And this was out of use of data on how climate change is impacting household and how it impacts men and women differently. We've used existing data to interest government to develop gender policies, also to advocate with the Ministry of Land for improved land service delivery. And we've used existing data also to lobby for more position, more appointment of women. So for us, it's really the capital that the grassroots women, who are the most powerful advocates in our opinion, because they are the ones who experience development or lack of it, they are able to use to influence policymakers and make governments listen to them. Our key ask, or what I would ask as a commitment from other people, is to look at data in broader terms and also open our mind towards citizen-generated data. There's a lot of data that exists within institutions that are not necessarily the national statistical system or what we call the official statistical system. That data tells the stories and experiences of women in their diversity. And the data with the national statistical system is changing, but it may take time to get there. So we need to pull all those efforts that other people have put in, private sector, civil society, and government, to be able to tell the story of women in its completeness. I will pass it to Jo.
Thanks, Freda. So I think in terms of the data lift, we can definitely see the opportunities for leveraging existing data for change, but we also know that significant gender data gaps persist and that many aspects of women's lives aren't visible in existing data. So in these instances, it's really important that we also look to increase the amount and the quality of gender data, because not everything that matters is currently measured, and poverty data is a really good example of that. So the World Bank estimated that COVID-19 would push almost 150 million new people into extreme poverty by 2021. And routine poverty measurement should be able to tell us how many of those people are women, in what age groups, do they have a disability, what's their sociocultural background, etc. But it actually can't, because poverty measurement predominantly continues to assess the circumstances of households instead of individuals. And changing this was identified as a priority in 1995 in Beijing, and it was reiterated as a gap in the 2017 report by the World Bank's Commission on Global Poverty. It's actually pretty extraordinary because it means the data that exists can't accurately be disaggregated to show how poverty varies by factors such as sex, age, ability, or the intersection of these. And that's despite all the other evidence we have that shows that these factors influence people's access to and control over resources. So by design, routine poverty measurement is hiding the ways in which being a poor man and being a poor woman are different. The patriarchal assumptions about what's important are so deeply embedded in our measurement approaches that the default experience that shows up in the data is the male one. So that leaves decision makers and change agents trying to act on gendered poverty, but without gendered data. And what this is persisted for so long for a number of reasons, but one of them is that we've lacked a credible alternative methodology for how to measure poverty. So in 2008, as part of an international and multi-stakeholder collaboration, IWDA set out to develop an individual level, gender-sensitive and multidimensional approach to poverty measurement that was informed by the views of women and men with lived experience of poverty. The measure was designed to overcome the limitations of the dominant approaches and to respond to the call from Beijing for gender and age disaggregated data on poverty. And I'm really proud to say the result was a world first individual level measure of multidimensional poverty, which IWDA is now taking forward as EqualMeasures. It's been tested and trialed in 6 countries. It's been refined and reviewed by global experts, and it increases the availability and the quality of gender data in 4 really important ways. It provides individual level measurement, which enables us to go beyond sex disaggregation and provide intersectional insights, so by sex, by age, ability, and the overlap of these. It reveals differences within households, providing data about the estimated 1/3 of global inequality that exists not between households, but actually within them. It provides insights about 15 dimensions of life based on what people with lived experience of poverty say matters for understanding their circumstances and changing them. And finally, it does so in a gender-sensitive framework. So it assesses areas of life that matter for understanding gendered experience, such as time use, as Emily mentioned before, unpaid work, access to contraception, menstrual hygiene, etc. So increasing the availability of quality gender data, the kind that I'm talking about, which is specifically designed to tell us something meaningful about gendered experience, can really disrupt existing narratives, and it makes space for a feminist framing about what matters. And so this is one of IWDA's gender demands in the Generation Equality Forum. We want to see a massive investment in individual level and gender sensitive poverty data so that we can finally advance the Beijing commitments on gender and poverty. It's language that we've advocated for in our leadership position in Action Coalition 6 on feminist movements and women's leadership. And we're really pleased that it's actually landed in the blueprint, which will be unveiled in its finality at the forum next week. It's the basis for accelerated and expanded commitments to be made and to invest in increasing gender data. And obviously we were not alone in advocating for this really big step up on gender data through the process. So I'll pass over to Emily now, who can share more about Data2X's work in that space.
Thanks, Jo. It's having been on this journey with IWDA and watching this progress over time, it's really exciting to hear everything that you all have done to increase the quality of available gender data. But also I just want to take a moment to thank you and Equality Insights and your organization for all the advocacy work you did within the Action Coalition on really making sure that gender data was Not the only thing front and center, but was certainly seen as being really integral to achieving our collective ambition. So thank you for that. This topic of improving gender data and the quality of gender data is like core to our mission. It's what we deeply care about. And I think that, it's important to recognize that improving the amount and quality of existing data is just as important as collecting new gender data. And I feel like that's something that's a nuance that sometimes gets lost, or things that people, say is, well, but what about, what could already be there, right? It's like, are you only interested in the new? Are you only interested in filling gaps? And it's, yes, there's absolutely, and Joe said this, there's data that's just simply not being collected, and we need to fix that. But there's also something that we could be doing about the amount and the quality of existing data that's out there. One of the areas that we're quite focused on, we actually just put out a paper about it last month, is we're really focused on financing for gender data. And over the years, thanks to the efforts of many people, not only the speakers on this call, but I'm sure so many of the participants on this call, thanks to the efforts of many, global recognition of the importance of gender data has really increased. But this awareness has not been met with increased financing, even though we know financing is key for bolstering really every part of the data system, from collection to analysis to uptake to impact. One example is that we've found that a really important way to improve gender data availability is to publish disaggregated data for indicators that have data but are currently lacking disaggregation. So countries may already have available data, it just may not be sex disaggregated, which then prevents us from understanding how issues affect people differently. It's actually a pretty important insight and solution. Some recent work that we've done with our partner Open Data Watch, we found that if all indicators for which there were currently any data were published with sex disaggregation, the gender data availability would rise to 85% in Asia and the Pacific, 76% in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 60% in sub-Saharan Africa. But as I was saying before, financial resources are really key to make this kind of work happen and to power this work. And that's why we're calling on donors to commit $500 million per year from now until 2030 to close the gender data funding gap. So modest request, but it's possible, right? There are plenty of other things that are getting this level of investment. And so why not this? In our financing report, we've actually outlined 6 areas of action that you can see. I won't enumerate them here, but there are 6 areas of action for stakeholders to take to make this funding goal a reality and improve gender data across the board. Commitments to gender data are not a one and done kind of situation. Improving gender data requires commitments and sustained commitments that go beyond a big event or a flashy moment. It requires consistent direct advocacy with governments, civil society, data producers, the private sector, and more. And it's really, of course, there's some complexities to it, but it's important that we continue to hold the line on getting gender data onto people's priority lists. Well, advocacy, I just want to say a word on advocacy as well. It's absolutely a mandatory component for fueling action on any issue. I just want to caveat, as an advocate, that I know it's not the only ingredient. There must also be solid statistical capacity and openness, like Frida talked about, to new sources of data and to listening to and incorporating new sources of data. There must be an evidence-based policy culture, and then resulting strong gender policies to support new and sustained action on gender data to improve women and girls' lives. But these 2 areas, both sex disaggregating existing data as well as bolstering financing for data systems around the world, are really key ingredients for improving both the amount and the quality of available gender data. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to speak about fueling demand and investment.
Thanks so much, Emily. My name is Amanda Austin. For those I haven't met yet, I work for EqualMeasures 2030, which is a partnership across global, regional, and national advocates who want to use gender data better in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And I see a number of friendly faces from our partners, both in the audience and amongst our speakers. So it's really lovely to be alongside you today. In terms of fuel, which is our third letter in our acronym, coming back to our lift, this is around fueling political will and funding to fill gender data gaps and to use gender data better. And I think for me, fueling really comes back to concepts around demand, right? And the sort of drumbeat for gender data. And that's both, as Emily really rightly said, improving the data that's already out there, but then also increasing the data that is available. And I think where EqualMeasures 2030 works in this is trying to work on that upstream demand side, especially with gender equality advocates who themselves are wanting to use more data, are wanting to see more evidence available that speaks to their work, to their lives, but aren't doing that for a number of different reasons. And that can be because data just in general is very difficult to access. They don't know where to go for that, or where it is available, it's really difficult. It's a PDF that's hard to find the right information that they're looking for. Or it feels really out of date. It's 5 years old and actually they don't see themselves reflected in that. And so we do a lot of work with national gender equality advocates, feminist organizations, including the wonderful Frida here, and I also see Justin from Kapal. Hi, Justin, in the audience from Indonesia, and a number of other organizations to improve the understanding of gender data, the value it can bring to advocacy, and inevitably what that leads to is a much stronger group of advocates who are demanding better and more gender equality data. And I think what we see then is that drumbeat getting louder and louder and louder across our constituency around this demand for increased political will from local decision makers all the way up to the national, and an increase in the funding that those decision makers are putting toward gender data. And we build this on our work with our partners, but also advocate surveys and policymaker surveys we've been doing as EqualMeasures 2030, and we can really see, even from a policymaker side, a lack of awareness around what gender data is available, what is the latest gender data, what can it tell us or not tell us. And when we worked and talked to these policymakers, many of them said, look, I don't know where to go to find that information. I don't know where to go to find even the child marriage rate in my country or in my particular county. And I think with increases in this demand from gender advocates themselves saying, where is the data? We want more of the data, and it can really raise it up the agenda of the different policymakers that they themselves are engaging with. I'll stop there. I know we're short on time, but I want to hand over to the wonderful Frida and Kituku to share Groots' experience on this.
Thank you, Amanda. Sure, without political will, resources without political will, they're just counterproductive. It won't lead us anywhere. And for us, I think our experience or what we've seen to be more transformative is sustaining a mutual and long-term collaboration with the National Statistical System in Kenya, and this is the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, so that we can influence how they are producing gender data, both in terms of quality, but what data, on what kind of indicators. It's easier to influence when you're inside, and it's also easier to sustain the campaign when you're partly part of the system. And for that reason, that's the reason why Groots Kenya joined the Interagency Committee on Production of Gender Statistics that brings both the government and civil society together. And you see, when you're patient, you'll see change of attitude. They also, policymakers get to appreciate, why do we demand data on certain things that may seem controversial, that may seem very sensitive, they get to appreciate by associating with you for a long time. They get to appreciate why we are demanding certain type of data, and of course, we are also able to offer or act as intermediaries between themselves and the women collectives on the ground. The other way we are influencing political will is, of course, expanding the movement that is demanding for gender data. And so with support from EqualMeasures 2030 and other partners, we are able to bring in even more women rights organizations to join the campaign for gender data. Closing rank with other non-traditional partners, we are looking very much into students, learners, especially those who are studying statistics, because we think they need to be socialized differently before they arrive in the labor market. Their own professors as well, so that we influence how they are delivering their courses, getting into partnership with them, because they are an important actor in production of data, and government respect them and government consult them even when they are conducting census. So where we are not influencing policymakers directly, we go to their best allies, who are the professors from the main universities in the country, getting out to the media. We know that politicians read newspapers and listen to news because it matters to them. And things that please me, some of the things that really please me is when a journalist calls me and say, you know, Frida, we are doing this story on women, and I wanted to know whether you have any data that I can quote. And I feel very happy because, you know, then the message is getting out there, and the influence that the media has cannot be underrated. Of course, when you talk about political will, you're talking about influencing people's hearts, not just mind, meaning you must have a long-term relationship with them. You're talking to them continuously. You know what makes them tick and what interests them. And that's why for us, this long-term mutual collaboration is very important. We've been, I would say, we are making some progress in our country, and we've seen in the last 1 year that the government has produced more gender data products than it did before, and that we've been part of informing what is being produced, in the sense that we even already know what is coming before the statistical products have been released, because we've been part and parcel of it. We've also seen an improvement in the survey tools that now are being used to collect data, because we have an opportunity as stakeholders to give our input, and they recognize us as an agency, especially the organizations representing women rights and women empowerment. So I think my ask is for other actors, specifically funders and investors, to both increase resources for gender data, as Emily mentioned, but also to demand for outcomes that are gender desegregated, because there's a power that they hold in a space that they are in. If they could demand from governments, even from us who benefit from those resources, that we are able to back up our outcomes and impact using gender desegregated data that reflects different intersectionality, it will generate, it will accelerate progress, and of course also open their hearts and investment in citizen generated data. Thank you. I'll pass it to John.
Thanks, Frida. So we are running short of time, but I just want to share a little bit about the T in our LIFT concept, the transform, and to just actually underscore points that my colleagues have now all made. So Amanda used the term drumbeat. Emily was talking about both the technical and political aspects of change. Frida was talking about not being able to make change without political will. And these are all really central concepts in that transform idea. So we are talking about transforming the politics of data as much as the processes, because gender data is political, as we've all just said. It's as political as any other part of the gender equality struggle. Gender data gaps reflect and they perpetuate the patriarchy. And so we do really need to transform these politics around gender data. And one of the key issues we've really identified in our work, and all of my colleagues have just identified as well, is really around building a common understanding between change agents and decision makers that the costs of the status quo are too high, and that they're being borne by women, by non-binary people, or people who don't conform to the cis-het norm. And they've really been normalized, these costs, to the point of invisibility, and then they're hidden by that invisibility. And so part of transforming the politics around gender data is really to make some of these costs visible, because the flip side is that the opportunity costs are real. There are finite resources being invested into data, and we share Data2X's demand on increasing the investment in gender data, but it is still a finite resource pool. So money that's being spent on gender unaware data is money that isn't supporting gender transformative data. And so we also work to transform the politics by building multi-stakeholder coalitions, bringing together gender advocates from both inside and external to government during the planning, the data collection, and analysis stages of the work that we do. We really provide opportunities for gender advocates to come together to build or deepen their familiarity and their own relationships of trust. As Frida was pointing out, these relationships really matter, and give them opportunities to utilize their own mandates in their own spheres of influence to work towards that common goal. And so at a program level for Equality Insights, the immediate focus of that work is on the uptake and use of Equality Insights data to inform gender responsive action. But at a macro or strategic level, this is really about further developing the infrastructure of feminist movements to be able to advance transformative change from within their own spheres in the countries where they're working. So this is another one of our gender data demands in the generation equality process. It's around equipping feminist political leaders and feminist movement actors with the gender data that they need to make gender equality a reality in this generation. So we want to see a commitment from all stakeholder groups in the forum that evidence-driven action will draw from gender-informed data. And I'll turn over to Amanda, who will talk about EqualMeasures 2030 work on data-driven feminist movements.
Thanks so much, Jo. And just wrapping up here with a last kind of sharing from us on our gender data demands, and then really looking forward to hearing from others as well. I think, Jo summarized that so beautifully, and the transformation needed is not in any way small. I think one of the ones that I just want to pull out and add to that, I think, is it has to involve understanding, valuing, and seeking out the voices, data, and perspectives of feminist organizations themselves, and valuing that knowledge and expertise that can be held by women's rights organizations working really closely, especially with those populations that are so likely to be hidden or lost in existing data sets. And Jo mentioned a few of those, but of course that also can include rural women, that can include women and girls living with disabilities, and individuals who are non-binary or gender non-conforming. And I think, if anything, COVID-19 has really shone a spotlight on that. And I want to do another hat tip to our wonderful colleagues from Kapal Perempuan, one of whom is here with us today, for the efforts that they went through to gather information about increases in child marriage in Indonesia around COVID-19. And that's shining a light on data that would have taken years to sort of show up if we'd waited for official data sources to become available with that information. And they were able to use that and share it with decision makers in real time to showcase how action was needed right now to prevent girls from being married very young in an emergency context like COVID-19. And so it's really just a shout out that part of that transformation is recognizing and valuing the data that's being gathered by women's rights organizations, citizen generated data, as Frida said. And for us, one of that gender data demands is something we're looking forward to sharing on the 30th and around the Generation Equality Forum, which is really a collective commitment with different colleagues, including those at IWDA, around this theme and trying to value that information and expertise held by these organizations much more systematically. And we're really looking forward to sharing that and discussing that with a much wider group. I now want to transition over and give the mic as much as we can to our colleagues who are here in the room with us. You've heard our own gender data demands. We'd love to hear yours. It's an open floor. We've created a meeting space here, so everyone is welcome to raise their hand or simply unmute and share your own gender data demands with the group. We've also been tracking the questions that have come through in the chat, and we'll also take this opportunity as panelists to take a look at those and see what we can come back on, and of course encourage those of you in the audience to respond as well to any questions that are particularly appealing to you that you want to share about. Over to the group. Intimidating. Frida, do you want to share, because I can see that you are responding in the chat in real time. Do you want to share some of the insights that you are sharing, especially I think with Maya, but others who've been really keen to hear a bit more about Groots' experience? Do you want to share some of the resources that you're talking about there?
Yes, Amanda, I think Maya is talking about the gender. Is it the gender dash? Maya was talking about the interagency committee, the link that I sent from UN Women, but I'll share a different one. So probably I can just expound a little bit on the committee that brings together different line ministries, and it's chaired by the State Department of Gender, the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, and it brings the sector of education, the KIPRA, which is a research institute in Kenya, ourselves, Groots Kenya, representing women rights organization, and the SDG Kenya Forum. And it's a functional platform because actually we do meet on a quarterly basis and develop a quarterly work plan. It has evolved, and we were able to develop together a gender statistical strategic plan, gender statistics strategic plan, the first one in the country. And some of the things that are in the strategic plan have already been achieved, like the county gender data sheets that provide the progress that the country is making at the subnational level on different areas. We worked on a time use survey tool, and it will be the first time that Kenya is conducting a time use survey. It's actually the last country in East Africa to do that. It's a tool that we really fought with the Bureau in terms of how we define and frame the questions. We've been able to release the first ever Women Empowerment Index together, of course, with the UN Women and other partners. So there's a lot of progress that is happening because there are stakeholders who are interested, stakeholders who are committing time to define what is important for the women and to also listen to each other. And of course, there is investment in terms of resources from the Gates Foundation, which also support the program, but most importantly, the leadership of Kenya Bureau of Statistics and the other women agencies who've been demanding for this for so long. In terms of the dashboard that Groots was able to publish, you can access it in the link that I have shared. It shows, it just harvests data from different producers, whether it's official data or unofficial data, and visualize it in the easiest format that, of course, people who are not statistician are able to read and download and use it for their advocacy. And I've shared the link on the chat. Amanda, back to you.
Actually, I might just jump in because I'm scrolling the chat and I can't find who it was, but someone I did see asked, how can they make commitments as part of the Generation Equality Forum process? So I'm just going to pop a link into the Commitment Makers website as part of Generation Equality. So if you or your organization haven't yet, but would like to be a commitment maker as part of this process, that's the link to the Commitment Makers website, and it outlines the steps you need to take to submit your commitments. And as we know, the process is ongoing, of course, beyond the Paris Forum. So it's not too late at all to take it back into your organization and to decide if you want to be a commitment maker in this process, and really encourage everyone to think about that if you haven't already.
This is Emily. I had also noticed at some point in the chat, I think Marisa had asked something about considering funding for new and better collection methods. And I can at least do a partial answer to that. One answer to that, or one aspect of that, is that I think in some of our financing goals and our financing demands, part of that is around, of course, improving data collection methodology, absolutely. And because a lot of this is also about ensuring that there is capacity within data systems to continually improve, data collection and make this transition from gender unaware data systems to gender aware and gender sensitive data systems. And so that's very much, kind of embedded in the spirit of that demand and that financial demand. The other piece of that on the kind of new methods piece, I would say this is something we've worked on quite a lot around some of the big data and the digital data methodologies that can exist and do exist. And we were able to mobilize some external resources in order to do a pretty big set of research on this. And I think there's a lot more to be done. There's a lot of opportunity there. One of the things that so many of our research and advocacy partners identified was that data access is a huge issue. And so this is where I think also really building better, stronger relationships with the private sector around data access and more transparency there is also really important. So I think that's just another avenue of investment that is important to think about as we move forward.
Let me also mention, as we continue with the campaign for gender data and as government starts taking baby steps, in my experience, and I know it's an experience of many African countries, governments have phobia around gender data in the land sector and the injustices that are committed to women and girls in the land sector. That is data that they do not want to touch. And we have to speak and speak louder about it. Otherwise, we'll continue experiencing the silence. And I say that because I saw a comment from somebody in Brazil. I think she's talking about the anticipated eviction of indigenous people from their own land. That's also an area that we can put a spotlight on in our gender data campaign.
So there's a range of other questions that are in the chat, but I'm keeping an eye on time and I know everyone will have a busy day ahead of them. So we might have to come in and wrap this up at this point. If we haven't answered your question and you'd like to further explore it with us, please reach out and be in touch. I think any of the panelists would love to carry on this conversation. This is the bread and butter of what we do, and happy to talk gender data at any point. The next step for us really is to consolidate the list of gender data demands that we've received across the video, further emails, social media, any demands that have been added to this chat thread tonight, or if you want to send them through after the fact, so that we can share them with the action coalitions next week and really amplify via social media across the forum. We'll also send out a recording of this event early next week, and again, really encourage you to share it with others. And we'll be tweeting and using our social media channels. So please follow us, promote the agreed language that's in the blueprints when it comes out, and help to really amplify this message. Obviously, generation equality is a moment. And we need the movement all working together from our own context if we're going to make the most of this moment. And then acknowledging, as Emily said earlier, this moment then needs to have energy and passion to sustain it beyond the big splashy moment and into the years to come. So really looking forward to seeing all the work that people who've joined us here today continue to do in this space. I want to thank everyone for giving your time. I know it's a webinar dense environment these days, and so we do really appreciate being able to have this opportunity to spend time with you all in conversation today. And a huge thank you to fellow panelists, so to Emily, to Frida, to Amanda, for your contributions today as well. So that's it from us. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to being in touch with the video and follow-up recording from this event.